Activists in Los Angeles are speaking out against the injustice facing minorities in America. The rally is part of a national day of action to stop mass incarceration. They're protesting the huge imprisonment numbers in the United States, some 2.4 million people, of whom 60% are African American or Latino.
Protesters say the murder of Trayvon Martin is just the latest example of racial profiling at work in the criminal justice system. They say Martin's killer, George Zimmerman, would have never been arrested if people across the country hadn't stood up and demanded it.
We need to make a change. We can't just be sitting around.
Protesters say Martin's death in Florida, along with the fatal shooting of African American teenager Kendrick McDade near Los Angeles, has forced them to change their behavior.
It makes me be more aware of my surroundings and what I'm doing. You know, it's hard to hear that someone that was my age and of my kind around getting killed for no reason.
Activists say the mass incarceration of minorities in America started in the 1970s. Authorities started rounding up thousands of African American men, but activists say it was not because of an increase in crime.
In fact, the crime rates, it has been shown, have gone down over that period of time. But yet the rate of incarceration, there's 8 times more people in prison today that were in prison when I got out.
Protesters blame America's so-called war on drugs for the massive increase in imprisonment. They say these mass arrests based on nonviolent drug law violations have hobbled families and minority communities.
This is nothing less than slow genocide, what they're doing. It's 2.4 million people in prison. They're torturing people in prison. This was brought out through the prisoners, 12,000 of them through the hunger strike last year.
Prisoner advocates say the inmates who went on a hunger strike are still facing the same torturous conditions. Prison officials are reportedly meeting with the inmates to discuss possible improvements. However, inmates say they are prepared to go on another strike if the prison system continues to disregard their demands. Ross Frazier, Press TV, Los Angeles.
And we are back now with the roiling debate on big city crime. A federal judge ruled this week that the stop and frisk tactics of New York City's police are unconstitutional, drawing a stiff rebuke from Mayor Bloomberg, qualified support from the Democrats out to replace him. So is it smart crime fighting or racial profiling? Our roundtable set to weigh in on that. First, ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas sat down with New York Police Chief Ray Kelly.
For critics, it's images like this that fuel the resentment over the NYPD's policy of stop and frisk. To some blacks and Latinos, it's naked racial profiling, with them as the targets of an occupying force.
I remember them banging my head into this.
Is it fair, some minorities ask, that African Americans and Hispanics make up 52% of the city's population, but black and Latino males represent 84% of those stopped? NYPD, keep your hands off me. But to the police and mayor, stop and frisk, enforced by a racially diverse department, is a highly effective crime-fighting tool.
We have to give the members of our police department the tool they need to do their jobs without being micromanaged and second-guessed.
When we met with Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, he flatly rejected a federal judge's conclusion that his tactics violate the Constitution.
Now, the critics call it racial profiling. The judge called what you do, stop and frisk, unconstitutional. Why is it not racial profiling?
Well, you have to apply a formula of sorts. Do the stops comport with the description given by the victims of perpetrators of violent crime? And our stops certainly do. 97% of the shooting victims in New York City are black or Latino, as is the identified perpetrators of these crimes.
The issue for some of the people, the thousands who are stopped, is that if they've committed no crime, you find no weapon, that is creating a sense of resentment. As an African-American male, I know I've been pulled over a couple times, for reasons I couldn't understand. And afterward, I sort of felt a little violated, a little frustrated. Can you see where the people are coming from?
Absolutely.
In terms of why they're frustrated?
Absolutely. Understandable. Nobody wants to be stopped. We have engaged in a major training evolution for several years, focusing on these issues, to do these stops with courtesy, do them with respect.
Stop and frisk allows officers to detain people they deem suspicious in high crime areas. A federal judge said the practice targets minorities, calling it demeaning and humiliating. Her ruling calls for a monitor to oversee NYPD practices and a trial program for some officers to wear cameras to record arrests, as they do in an increasing number of cities. Again, Kelly is skeptical.
When do you turn the camera on? When do you turn it off? Do you have it on when somebody comes and wants to give you confidential information?
For all the critics, Kelly points to these blunt facts. There is far less crime and less blood in his streets. In New York City, there have been more than 7,300 fewer deaths in the 11 years since Bloomberg took office than in the previous decade. That's a 50% drop.
What we're doing and what we're trying to do is save lives. Murders are down to record lows, shootings down to record lows. Things are going right here in New York, and this decision certainly has the potential of overturning it.
The preliminary census numbers are just estimates, but they point to huge growth for U.S. minorities. In fact, racial minorities made up roughly 85% of the U.S. population growth over the last decade, one of the largest shares ever, with Hispanics counting for a big chunk of the gain.
The growth of the Hispanic population is one of the stories that will be written out of the 2010 census.
The early findings offer a glimpse into the 2010 census results that are being released on a state-by-state basis beginning this week. That data is used in each state's often contentious process of redrawing political districts based on population size and racial makeup.
It's going to be the case that there will be more Hispanic officials at all levels of government being elected in states like Texas, in states like California, where minorities and especially Hispanics make up a large part of the population growth.
In fact, 4 of the 8 states that will gain House seats as a result of redistricting owe at least half of their population gains in the past decade to Hispanics. They include Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Nevada. And those redistricting changes could have political implications.
I think savvy political strategists, people who are drawing these boundaries, need to keep in mind what the elections are going to look like 5 years, 10 years out, when they understand the importance minorities will have in electing people to office.
The preliminary figures also suggest a big jump in the number of multiracial Americans, increasing roughly 20% in the past decade to over 5 million people.
It has implications in terms of racial categories, identification, and whether we might start moving beyond the idea of racial categories and the idea that we are multiracial or just Americans.
Demographers already estimate that minorities will become the U.S. majority by mid-century. Fry said the minority youth population, people under 18, will become the youth majority by 2023. Kelly Daschle, The Associated Press.